You can now stream the forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana free on Tubi TV. Hello friends, we are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. The views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. All that being said, enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Greg the Hydrogen Man. First, watch the Forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana. That's available on Tubi and multiple streaming platforms. You can get a Rokfin premium membership, get access to all our premium content at rokfin.com/FKN Plus. Always be sure to download our podcast episodes directly through Spreaker if you're listening through any audio podcast provider. We're booking guests for February. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Greg the Hydrogen Man. He is a molecular hydrogen therapy trailblazer, a specialist, researcher, and host of the popular YouTube channel Uprising 144K Hydrogen Man. Greg, welcome. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, Chris. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, man. Thanks so much for coming on. Looking forward to learning all about hydrogen health technology, as well as the proposed health benefits, how it can help protect against things like EMF radiation, tumors, hormone support, and much, much more. Before we get into that and all the benefits, this is your first time on, so tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you down your path.
Well, originally I worked in the medical field for like 2 decades or something, and maybe a little bit more. And then I got sick. And, working with numerous doctors and specialists and hospitals, I really quickly realized in the first decade of my work that there's not a lot that they can do. That's really what I realized. I realized so many people's problems coming in and just the band-aids and the terrible answers they get from doctors like, we don't really know what causes it. No, we really can't fix it. Here's your band-aid, a pain pill or some other pill that really doesn't work and has numerous side effects. And I should say before I keep going, I'm not going to give any medical advice today. I'm not making any medical claims today. And I'm not making any claims for or against any product or products. Everything today is my opinion. But anyway, I got to put that out there because of the amount of attacks that I've been getting. So now this lawyer I have, he's like, just say that.
Right on. Yes. Gotcha.
Anyway, so I ended up myself getting sick. And once I got sick, it was just a nightmare because I knew that I know the gauntlet of going through the whole, medical avenue. And of course, I did obviously have to look into mainstream medicine, and they did nothing to fix my issues. I mean, they literally couldn't do anything. And so I had to take it, upon myself. And so I'm a real big data guy. I have a very strong opinion that most of the health industry, including alternative health, in my opinion, there's just a lot of stuff out there that's garbage. The majority. I hate to say that, but that's what I encountered. I've seen lab tests on products. I've seen supplements harm people. I've seen it all. So for me, I really had to figure this out if I was going to save my own life, because I was really sick. I mean, I had major problems. I mean, I couldn't even walk. I literally couldn't even pick up a glass of water or work a remote control because of the amount of pain I was in, which kept me from being able to even stand up also, like I said, and walk. And of it, I had a heart condition that was really bad that they told me would end my life. I'm technically supposed to be dead by now. And I was told I needed open heart surgery for it. My kidneys and my liver were really not at their best. It appeared that I had an autoimmune issue, so my gut was a mess. I had this kind of autoimmune issue causing a lot of inflammation. And on top of all that, my immune system was absolute garbage. So it was just numerous problems. Sometimes I'd even feel like short of breath, so I didn't feel like my oxygen levels were where they should be. Just things were not working, basically, very good in my body. And so because of that, I ended up, unfortunately, I lost everything. You know, I couldn't work. You know, you lose your home. You just lose a lot of things. And for me, it was a soul crusher, if I'm really quite honest with you. It just ruined my life. And I was reading all the latest medical data that I could find, because a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the stuff that's being used in Western medicine is typically pretty outdated. I mean, they're 10, 20 behind oftentimes. And so I was reading all the latest medical data, and I stumbled upon some data in regards to hydrogen. Now, when I started reading about it, I honestly immediately thought this stuff sounds like a scam, because it was way too good to be true. I mean, this worked amazingly well. And I was just a skeptic, and as I am, I want really good data, and I really want to find the real stuff versus just hearsay and anecdotal stuff. And so I kept reading, and I became very desperate after about 3.5 to 4 years of reading the data and just getting worse. My health was it was bad. And so I got so desperate, and I'm like, how do I get my hands on this hydrogen stuff? And that was a major problem. I didn't know the amounts, like the milligrams I was supposed to take, or how many milliliters per liter am I supposed to be inhaling of the gas.
How did you first come across it? Where did you find the initial information about hydrogen?
I found it in medical literature. So scientific studies that were being done. And because I was such a skeptic, I'm like, who's doing these studies? So then that took me to Japan. And it led me to Japan. And that's when I realized that the Japanese were literally the mecca of hydrogen. They understand better than anybody there is. They just know so much about hydrogen, not just medically, by the way. They're gonna change the world with hydrogen. Hydrogen is gonna be a huge part of the future. And so that's kind of how it all got started. And then I had to obviously not learn just about what it can do, but then learning how to make it, how to consume it, you know, to see if it can help me. And it transformed my life. And then it actually transformed other people in my life, like my father, for example, different relatives, different friends. And when I started seeing the power of hydrogen, it just blew me away, because I had tried all sorts of stuff. I had tried the diet. I had tried a lot of different supplements. Of course, I was watching podcasts. I was trying different diets. I tried something called HBOT, which is like an oxygen machine, and different types of treatment that they do with that. I spent an absolute fortune, actually, sadly, on all sorts of different modalities to try to really overcome this health issue that I was having. And in the end, the hydrogen just transformed it. I mean, just to name off a few things that I have personally seen, not what all the studies show, because the studies show almost 200 ailments, and there's not like just 10 studies or 20 studies. There's like over 2,000 studies up to date. And so clearly hydrogen is amazing. But I've seen things like, even in my own family, high blood pressure disappear, cholesterol issues, diabetes, arthritis, glaucoma, macular degeneration, even a retina tear, a lot of different skin issues. In fact, there's a medical center now. They're using the protocols that I created, of all things, and the results have been so amazing. In fact, one of the people had like a stroke, and they couldn't walk, they couldn't talk, they couldn't dress themselves. Now they're dressing themselves, now they're talking, now they're walking. And this other person who had some really major skin conditions. I've seen a lot of skin conditions. Gut issues, people with Crohn's disease, celiac disease, autoimmune issues. Even my heart condition went away, and I was told I needed open heart surgery. So it was just so unbelievable, all the things that I'd seen, and the way that hydrogen appears to accelerate healing by triple the speed, the way it protects against different things like not just radiation, but even then other stuff like, have you ever heard of a drug called cisplatin?
No.
So it's a cancer drug for like tumor.
Okay.
Now, the interesting thing about it is you won't find doctors using it very often, because it appears to basically destroy your kidneys. So if you take this drug, you're going to end up needing a kidney transplant, right? they did a study where they used hydrogen while using the cisplatin, and the kidneys kept over 70% of their function. So basically, you were able to receive the treatment, quote unquote, and then you could walk out with your original kidneys. So it shows you the power of how hydrogen can protect the body from all sorts of different stuff. One of the crazier things that I realized and learned, it's been over a year now, but very few people know about it, is if I spend too much time out of the sun, and even a lot of friends and family that I know, we burn, right? You get red or you get a sunburn. And started realizing that I wasn't burning. And then I started realizing that these other friends and family members weren't burning either. And then I finally realized that the hydrogen was not just keeping us from burning, which is insane, in my opinion. No sunscreen, no nothing. My personal theory is that it's also allowing us to absorb the light and utilize it in a more effective manner. It really transforms the body and does things that people have a hard time literally believing. And I've done a lot of blood work on myself, trying to see if my methods have been working or not throughout the last decade. And excuse me, but the most recent blood work was really wild, because anybody who's worked in the medical establishment knows that typically you're not going to get a phone call about something, whether it's a scan or blood work, unless it's bad news. If it's good news, they don't call you, because otherwise they have to be calling everybody and saying, hey, you're fine. And I received a call from the doctor on my last blood work, which made me really nervous. I was like, why are you calling me? What's going on? And she said, well, I saw something in your blood work. I've been doing this for over 3 decades. And I was just nervous. I'm like, just tell me what you found, please. And she said, don't worry, there's nothing wrong. The reason that I'm calling is because I've never, in over 30 years of doing this, I've never seen blood work that looks like yours. She said, it's unbelievable. And the fact that you have, everything looks great, but you also don't have any nutritional deficiencies, which is a big thing that I was trying to cover while trying to overcome medical issues, because it's pretty well established that we know if we have a deficiency, it typically leads to some type of disease. For example, like scurvy. Like if you have a vitamin C deficiency, it leads to scurvy, and you can fix scurvy with vitamin C, just getting your levels up. So I wanted to just be like perfect and have all my levels up. And the average person just doesn't know that the average American is typically deficient. Almost everybody's deficient. Everybody's deficient in something. It's really hard to be perfect. And so that's why she had called me, because she's like, this looks unbelievable. And I don't really like to talk about diet too much. I'll just say that she started asking me about my diet, and then she became even more shocked, because she said, there's just no way you can eat like that and have no deficiency. She goes, that's impossible. And I'm like, well, you're looking at the blood work. And she said, yeah, it's unbelievable. And I think what happens is the hydrogen, because of the way that it affects the gut so well, by the way, it's amazing what it does for the gut. It's allowing my body to become ultra efficient. It's like transforming my body. That's the crazy part. It's literally allowing me to be able to absorb nutrients, minerals, all sorts of stuff on a whole other level, all while protecting me from a lot of the bad stuff. So it's just been something that's absolutely transformed my life and other people in my life. And so I opened up my YouTube channel, mostly because I'd made a prayer when I was really sick and I was so desperate. We pray when we're desperate sometimes. And I just asked for help from up above and say, hey, if you can guide me and help me find the solutions to these problems, I promise I'll share them, the solutions for free, and give it to people. And that's what ended up happening. So that's why I ended up doing my YouTube channel and getting on your show. So I appreciate you having me on to be able to share the information that I uncovered. That it's really simple too. It's nothing particularly complex.
Right on. And for most people, including myself, when they hear hydrogen, the last thing they're probably thinking of is something for health benefits or for treatment purposes. But let's redefine hydrogen as it relates to this. Talk a little bit about what it is and how it affects the human body.
So ultimately, we're talking about molecular hydrogen, right? There are different types of hydrogen. So we are talking molecular hydrogen, which is technically H2. And it's just a gas, a lot just like oxygen. Oxygen's just a gas. So, nothing particularly crazy. And the way, modern science doesn't know the full mechanism of how exactly it works. They see that it works, but they don't know the full mechanism. But there have been discoveries. They do see that it appears to function as a selective antioxidant, which is really a big deal, because people don't actually know that different antioxidants come in different sizes. So if you were to see like vitamin E or vitamin C or glutathione or CoQ10 or whatever, those would be larger than hydrogen. And the fact that hydrogen is so tiny is part of its, not just its mystery, but the way that it's so powerful, because it can literally get into anything, including your mitochondria. That was one of the first studies done, was on the mitochondria, and which is really important because a lot of people don't realize as far as how important our metabolism is. Like in my personal opinion, and even I believe there's a doctor named Dr. Seyfried, but I actually believe that cancer is actually what they call a metabolic disorder. And there's a lot of different things that are metabolic disorders, in my opinion, which is one of the reasons why it can cause so much fatigue and cause so many issues, because you're not really producing the amount of energy that you should be producing. And so hydrogen, what it really appears to do, so yes, it's a selective antioxidant. Yes, it appears to be an anti-inflammatory, a cell signaling molecule, all sorts of different things that it appears to be. But the biggest one that I think is interesting is just how it combats oxidative stress. So in Japan, they had a list of all these medical conditions that they had seen hydrogen be effective for. And they had all the medications, pharmaceutical medications, next to each condition that would be used for such a condition. And then they would have another list of medicines for the side effects of the original medicines. And basically, you ended up with a massive list of pills. And then they just showed hydrogen. And they're like, how can hydrogen do all this? How can it be effective for all these things and do all these things with no side effects? In fact, the only side effects so far that I have seen are, one, an anti-aging effect. So they didn't really think that it would be for anti-aging, but they did some blood work on a Japanese guy. And in Japan, they do some really interesting blood work. They can literally tell you roughly what your age is just by looking at your blood. And then they tested this guy. He used molecular hydrogen, proper levels and properly made. I can never emphasize that enough. And then they tested his blood again after 1 year, and his blood ended up being 5 years younger. So it seems to have this, very interesting anti-aging effect. Now, after using it for years, the one thing that really nobody's talked about that I just kind of stumbled upon on my own is that it also appears to have this very strange, almost like spiritual aspect to it. The way that it affects the pineal gland, I think a lot of it has to do with the oxidative stress that the pineal gland suffers. And also it appears that the pineal gland is not protected by the blood-brain barrier. And just I just think just the oxidative stress in general, so it can really function properly. And also because I think hydrogen was the very first thing ever created, quote unquote, let there be light, and all the stars, people don't realize that all the stars in the sky are basically made of almost entirely hydrogen. They are also made of helium, but helium actually is, just another form of hydrogen. And so it really ended up being this strange moment for me, because it took years. It didn't happen immediately. And then I started having like visions and premonitions and all sorts of crazy stuff. I don't even like to use the word prophecy, but I mean, I have made, quote unquote, I don't like to call them that, but I made a few predictions, I guess I could call it that. And they were so accurate that I ended up actually being on another show that has to do with prophecies, because somebody knew me and they were like, how did you know that this was going to happen? And I think that everything is literally written in hydrogen. I think hydrogen is literally the source of all. It is the book that has been keeping all the information's there since the beginning. Just like, have you ever seen this book before, by the way?
Yes. It's a great book.
So a lot of people, yeah, it is a great book. And The Hidden Messages in Water, basically, and what people don't realize, again, it's a Japanese guy who discovered this. The Japanese, I'm telling you right now, they are absolutely next level when it comes to water. And so that's primarily how I transformed my life, was learning how to clean water to the highest degree. Because, by the way, water filters are not going to clean your water completely. And I've been recently, a laboratory recently contacted me because they saw me on a show. And the things that we're seeing even in water filters. So this lab was doing lab tests on water filters, and it's crazy. But water has a very special attribute to it that you can actually purify it to the highest degree pretty inexpensively. And it's, in my personal opinion, very important to have ultra clean water if you're both trying to transform your health and also transform spiritually. The body's like a temple, and the blood of the body needs to be extremely clean, really, to take it to another level, which ended up happening a lot to me by accident. I didn't do it on purpose. I was just trying to heal my body. That's all I was trying to do. little did I know that so many other things would be coming with this.
You mentioned how hydrogen contains building blocks for our entire reality. There may be some sort of hidden properties that we're still not aware of when it comes to the benefits of hydrogen. Based on all your research, do you think that in our ancient past they had knowledge of the benefits of hydrogen?
Absolutely. And I've already seen it. I say I've seen it because I've had the visions, but basically what I can tell you is places like Atlantis, for example, masterful with water, masterful with hydrogen, they knew all about it. And even the pyramids, I've known this for quite some time. It appears that people are starting to catch on and realize that the pyramids, for example, the Giza pyramid has to do with hydrogen. And there's even more to it than that. People haven't realized it yet. Either someday I'll talk about it or they'll eventually figure it out. But hydrogen is a huge component and part of how it works. But it's fundamental for, I mean, between electricity and hydrogen and water, those are your magic pieces to do all sorts of amazing stuff.
Right on. Going back to your experience with hydrogen, how did you use it? And what was the process? How fast did you start to notice any difference? What was it like? Can you kind of walk us through?
So first I started with hydrogen water. Now I will say before I even begin, I don't use nor recommend any of these little bottles because people are always thinking when I talk about hydrogen, they think I'm talking about these things. So I'm sure we'll get into it later, but how you make the hydrogen really matters. That's one thing that I learned. You can't just look at medical data, because then you have to learn how to apply it. And that's where I had to learn about engineering. The science of metals was also very important, metallurgy, and even the science of the membranes, all the different ways to make hydrogen. It was really quite involved. And basically, that's how I first started. And of course, all my research kept leading me to Japan. It just kept going back to Japan. And all those little bottles that I just showed you, they're basically all made in China. And the Chinese are doing things that I'm not really happy about. But the Japanese are really big on like purity and doing things right and doing it for the love. And I was looking at all the data of every single machine. I literally know all the machines out there. And it led me to this particular machine that it just happened to be the #1 machine in all of Japan. So that would have really narrowed down my research if I would have just looked for that. It took me forever. And so ultimately I got this machine that makes, and I guess for people who want to see it, it's at a website called holyhydrogen.com. But this particular machine, it's all Japanese engineered, Japanese hand built. They're all lab tested, certified. Nobody does that for every single machine. And the machine allowed me to be able to drink the water, so hydrogen water, which is very interesting, I would say, because another thing that I oftentimes did is, yes, I would read scientific data, but I would also look to nature for answers. I really believe in the power of nature and creation. And so I started mimicking certain things about what nature does. And one of them was, have you ever heard of a place called Lourdes, France?
Yes.
Or Lourdes? Yeah. So Lourdes, France has these quote unquote healing waters or, healing springs that people drink from. And nobody could figure out what was so special about that water. And eventually the Japanese did find out that water had high levels of molecular hydrogen. So nature actually makes this water. I think that's a really important thing. And then so I saw that, and then also how nature actually purifies water. So I mimicked that also based on, I have lab reports. These are third-party lab reports on water and what's in the water. There's so many things, pages of just nasty, nasty stuff. There's no wonder that water would potentially make us sick on top of all this. And so that was kind of the beginning of really understanding. So I started drinking the water, understanding how and when to drink it. I actually created protocols, which turned out to be the best protocols out there right now. Everybody started copying my protocols. And that's what they're using in some of these like healing centers where they're literally using my protocols. And now doctors are literally flying to this center because of results that they've seen for their patients. And they want to know what the center's doing. And they're literally just doing my protocols. And so that's how I got started. And then the reason I like the device that I use is because it allows you to also inhale the hydrogen gas. So drinking the hydrogen water seems to have a certain effect on the body. Inhaling the gas seems to have another effect. I like to do both. And I have a specific way which I do both. And that ended up causing even more abundance in regards to health that neither one of these could do alone, as far as the water or the gas, which is fine if you did them alone too, and there are benefits. But when you did them together, the data really appears to show that that was the way to go, basically. And so having to do all that.
How soon after you started did you start to notice a difference with how you were feeling?
Well, for me, it took months. I've even seen, like, I remember my father was a really good example. He had glaucoma for over 3 decades, and it took him about 2 to 3 years before his glaucoma went away. So it's kind of like, I think the really good example is like people who get sick. A lot of times you don't just get sick, from one day to the next. It's something that's building up inside your body that takes time, and then eventually it turns into illness. So it's not just, it doesn't just happen overnight. So the hydrogen's kind of the same way. So like if you were, really overweight, you're not going to lose all your weight in a day, or a couple days or a week. It takes time to get in shape. And so for the hydrogen, for me, it took a good 6 to 8 months. For my father, it was a good 6 to 8 months, except for the glaucoma. So all the other issues he had, but the glaucoma is the one that took the longest. And I typically see a relation. This is data from Japan too. The longer you had the condition, the longer it takes for it to go away. So what I typically, for every 10 years you've had a condition, it takes about a year of using hydrogen for it to go away. But it just depends. I've seen people get results within a week or two also. So it's kind of wild, the spectrum, but I think a really good solid number is 6 to 8 months from everything that I've seen throughout all these years.
So the primary ways to utilize this would be with hydrogen, water, or gas?
Yeah, I think water, okay, so in my opinion, water is always going to be foundation. So I always teach on how to clean water to the highest degree. And to make it easy for people, if they want to know what equipment I use, that's on a different website. It's a different company. That one's called mypurewater.com. And I guess if people want a discount code, they can use my code if they want. It doesn't matter. But my code is UPRISING144K. And those are what's called carbon distillers. So they clean the water to the highest degree is my first thing I want to do, because I want to eliminate anything that could potentially be causing the illness that I had or the illnesses that I had. And then you're going to be using the water as a carrier for the hydrogen gas. So you're literally dissolving the gas into water, kind of like carbonated water has, CO2 dissolved into it, the gas. And so it's the same thing with hydrogen. And then just drinking the water. I mean, I like to drink it on an empty stomach. That's my protocol, typically 20 to 30 minutes before meals. One of the reasons I like to do it that way too is because of how protective hydrogen is. So our meals are always, maybe there's a chemical in there. There's always something in our meal that's not really good for us, as far as food's concerned. And so I think taking in the water first, it helps us digest it. It helps us protect us against potential any harmful things in the food. And in my opinion, it also helps me with what I call super absorption because of the nutrients, which has been one of the weird things I've seen my body now being able to do and confirmed by blood work. So
what would be the main differences between what you'd experience using water and gas?
Well, I think, again, for the water, first thing, that's kind of how nature appears to do it. And the GI system requires just a massive amount of water to digest a meal. A lot of people don't realize that. A lot of times, that's why when people are eating, in the middle of the meal, they'll get thirsty and want to drink water. But at that point, now you're going to dilute the stomach acids. The water's going to sit in your stomach. This is why I like drinking the water on an empty stomach. And it'll go right through you in 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, and prep the body for the digestion of the meal. The hydrogen gas, the reason I like the hydrogen gas, and not to be confused with, some people mix it or try to produce hydrogen and oxygen. The medical data clearly is on pure hydrogen. And that's what I like to use, obviously. But the pure hydrogen gas can go straight to the brain. I've worked with people with Alzheimer's, dementia, traumatic brain injury, swollen brains. I've worked with people with all these different types of conditions, which has been very interesting. And the hydrogen gas can go straight to the brain. Also, the way that it affects the eyes, because the eyes are kind of technically part of the brain. And so if you have some eye condition, so that's another thing. And also the way it affects your lungs. So if you're inhaling the gas. So it's just kind of a little different than the water, because the water goes into your GI system, the way that it affects, in my opinion, the kidneys, the liver, and things of that nature.
Should people be weary when trying to find the best quality hydrogen out there? Is there some that may not be as good as others?
In my opinion, absolutely. I've seen it. I've literally, it's kind of sad, but I've seen people get sick from using the wrong type of hydrogen. And even more recently, there's a laboratory, like I was telling you, that contacted me, and they've actually been doing lab tests on different hydrogen products. And that's why the guy had contacted me, because he found some things, anomalies that were basically some not so, I'll just say not good stuff. I'm not going to name the products because for many reasons, but all I'll say is that I would never want to use, so far from what I've seen, I would never use any product that's made from China so far. I wouldn't use any product that uses stainless steel as a metal or uses something called lye or sodium hydroxide. Any machine that uses just distilled water, I'm also a little bit wary of, and any machine that uses plated metals. So there's a lot of like again, these are obviously a good example, these little tiny bottles that are quote unquote they're basically made in China. I've seen lab tests now on the membranes. I don't like what's in the membranes. They're using plated metal, and they also directly electrolyze the water, which creates more impurities also. So I don't use these. You couldn't pay me to use one of those. So there's a lot, there really is a lot to it, but luckily the Japanese, I mean, if it wasn't for this one company, I've only found maybe 2 or 3 good hydrogen machines out of all the hundreds that are out there. Most of them are just, I hate to say it, but Chinese garbage in my opinion. They don't seem to care about trying to make the gas, a super, super high quality without any type of byproduct, because you're running electricity through metal and water. Plated, I just did a video on this recently. When plated metals, have you ever seen what happens to something that's plated after time?
Yeah.
So you've seen it, and there was somebody recently who was like a naturopathic doctor or something, and her story was interesting. She had her husband is a jeweler, and he'd always tell her how important the metal is. Like if you buy earrings or wear a ring or something that's not plated, and the purity needs to be extremely high. And she bought a cheap pair of earrings. She thought it wouldn't be a big deal, but she does blood work quite regularly also. And what did she find? But heavy metal toxicity in her blood. And she's like, where did this come from? It was her jewelry, because her jewelry was using plated metal. And her husband told her, hey, I told you, don't use anything that's not of super high purity and high quality. So I thought that was one of many interesting stories. There's many like that I've seen throughout the years.
What would you recommend using if a person is interested in starting to use hydrogen? Are there different devices? Are there different things to create hydrogen water versus the gas? Could you tell us a little bit about the options?
Yeah, there's both, right? There's machines that make the water, and there's machines that make the gas. The one that I happen to use happens to do both, which is perfect. And the reason that I was kind of impressed when I found this machine, this Japanese machine, was because you want to read all the levels, all the numbers. And a lot of the numbers that I've seen out there honestly don't make any sense. They literally are numbers. I think they're just trying to trick people, and the average person just doesn't understand. And when I found the numbers on this machine, I thought, wow, it literally fell in line with all the medical data that I was reading. And then I found out later that that's how they developed the machine. They did it literally on purpose, following the medical data. That's why it's like the latest of devices that are following the actual medical data, from the amount of hydrogen gas that it puts out, because it puts out the amount of hydrogen gas that is used in top university hospitals in Japan. They use roughly about 130 milliliters per minute. So when you see devices out there that claim 2,000 milliliters per minute, to be quite honest, it's just ridiculous. I mean, this is not what's being medically used. And when you start using amounts like that, I mean, hydrogen can displace oxygen. So you want to follow the data, in my opinion. And so
that's what I was going to ask. Can you use too much? Is it possible to overdose?
I think with the right equipment, in my opinion, no, because you're getting the right amounts, and it really is quite safe, and typically off gas where you breathe it out. But like I said, if you do levels that are way too high, but a lot of these levels, just so you know, they're literally guesstimates. They're not actually testing their equipment. That's one thing that I found out the hard way. There's so much that I found through my research. And that's why I said literally the device that I use, it gets lab tested and certified, every single machine that they make. Nobody does that. I was so dumbfounded. I was like, wow, you guys do this? And they're like, yes, because that machine is being used in numerous medical centers in Japan. It's their #1 machine. You have to know how much the hydrogen that you're getting in your nose. So that's another big one. They literally were measuring the amount of hydrogen gas coming out of the little tubing, the cannula, right by your nose. And that's important because most machines are guessing their production, not how much you're actually getting in your nose, because the Japanese are just so detail oriented. A lot of people don't know their culture, but they're so into the details. They found out that you were literally losing hydrogen as it was getting to your nose because of the tubing, because hydrogen's so tiny. Personally, I think hydrogen is interdimensional molecule. That's just my opinion, because this stuff literally goes through anything. Like it'll go right through glass, it'll go right through metal, it'll go right through walls, it'll go right through your tissues. I mean, it's kind of bonkers what it does. And so the Japanese had to develop, they actually had Yamaha do it. So that's another beautiful thing about the guy who created this device. He got so much help from like Toyota and Yamaha and G-Shock and some metal company from Japan to make the best hydrogen machine. I mean, the whole reason apparently he wanted to do it was for his daughter. His daughter was actually dying. She was born with ALS, otherwise known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And so he knew that hydrogen, based on the data, should be able to help her. And he wanted to develop basically the best machine there is for home use, which is what he did. And he asked for help from top engineers in Japan. And then, you know, his daughter was supposed to be lucky to make it to the age of 5. And she is now, I believe, like 13 years old or something. So it was unbelievable. And the machine became such a big hit in Japan. But also the nanobubbles that the water makes is very important. So they also make basically better nanobubbles than anybody there is. So you get really good absorption of the hydrogen through your GI system also.
You mentioned that there are some anomalous attributes to hydrogen, how it basically can go through anything. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, like I said, it's either, I mean, the theory is they think that it's just so small that it can, again, go through anything. I think it's, personally, I think it's going in and out of dimensions. I think it's literally interdimensional, and it'll pop out and pop back in, and it appears to go through something when it's actually just kind of disappearing and reappearing. It's pretty bonkers. I mean, to give you an example, remember we were talking about this book here a second ago? So I'll give you one of my theories, and probably once I say it, everybody's going to think they came up with it, because that's happened a lot. But you see how water is affected by words, music, pictures, all sorts of stuff, right? Like this was a beautiful picture on water, and it came up to this. Yeah, exactly. And so I don't think it's the water that has the memory, because that was what this guy said. He goes, I have proven that water has memory. I don't think it's the water, my friend. The hydrogen within the water, because water is H2O. Right. You got your H right there. And there's many more secrets that I'll probably reveal in time. But basically, it's the hydrogen that appears to have not just the memory, but it is the true archive of everything in existence. That's why I believe, because this is the things that started being shown to me. I mean, this started, I believe, about 4 years or so after. And after the 7 years of using hydrogen, it's done something to me for sure. I have some of the weirdest, I don't even know where the information comes from, stuff that you will find in no book. And I have a lot inside of me.
Have you experienced any suppression or pushback from the medical industry once you started discussing the benefits of this?
You know, the biggest pushback I get are from, I hate to say this, but this is the truth, is the people who sell these type of Chinese products. Because, I mean, people buy them from China and they can put anybody's name on it. You know, they can literally slap the name of their companies. And I only share what I personally use. That was the deal that I, quote unquote, made with myself, between me and my creator, you know, because I was like, look, if you show me the way to transform this body and come back from this crazy medical problems that I have, you know, then I promise I'll share them. And so everything that I share is just what I personally use. So I have been offered a lot of money. I mean, full disclosure, I've been offered a lot of money from numerous hydrogen companies and water filtration companies and supplement companies. I mean, obviously, you know, they see my channel, and I've turned down basically almost all of them except for the ones that I use. And the biggest thing that, in my opinion, that I've used for transforming my health is just clean water, clean hydrogen, And beyond that, just eating a little more cleanly, making sure I'm getting all my nutrients and minerals, some kind of basic stuff. But one of the really great examples, I thought it was a great example. I remember when my father said, look, I don't want to transfer my diet. I don't want to stop eating cheeseburgers and French fries. He didn't want to change anything, honestly. And he said, the one thing I'll do, he goes, I will drink that clean water. So I got him a carbon distiller, and he goes, and I'll put that hydrogen in the water. So I got him his, and just that, he didn't change anything else. Just that, all those medical issues from, the arthritis to the diabetes to the glaucoma, all the different things, they all went away. And I'm very impressed by that, because I thought he'd have to do a combination. And I still do. I think it depends on the severity of your medical issues. But I have seen hydrogen just on its own do literally the most amazing things. It's literally borderline hard to believe. And I understand why it's hard to believe, because I've been duped numerous times. I had to try, as you can imagine, numerous different diets, numerous different supplements and machines to overcome my medical issues. And it was just really frustrating, to be quite honest with you, because I just wanted some truth, and so.
Maybe you could share some of people's experiences with hydrogen, what they've used it for, success stories, basically.
Yeah, there's tons of them. I mean, I've seen here's one. There's this guy who smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day for decades. I don't even remember how many years anymore. I think it was like 30 years or more. And he had a major problem with oxygen saturation in his blood. Now, you can use oxygen, but ask any medical professional, you don't want to use oxygen for very long. It'll actually cause issues down the road, because your body's adapting to extra oxygen that you're putting in, and your body will literally start making less red blood cells. What you kind of want to do if you're going to do something like this, which is what pro athletes do, they actually go high altitude training, which is where you get less oxygen. Or sometimes they'll wear the masks to get less oxygen, because they'll get the body to produce more red blood cells. And then once you start breathing in just normal amounts of oxygen, which is 21% roughly in our atmosphere, the body can utilize it real well. Well, this guy, he was supplementing oxygen, but his issues were just getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where he just couldn't get off the oxygen. He literally had to have it on all day long. He couldn't get off of it for even 30 seconds. It just ruined his life. And he got the hydrogen, started using the hydrogen, and sure enough, his oxygen saturation levels, because we're already getting oxygen, it's just a matter of making your body more efficient to be able to utilize that oxygen. Just like nutrients that we get from food, we want to be able to be efficient at absorbing those nutrients in the body to utilize them. So that was one example. I've seen numerous, some of the other big ones. The big ones are like the Alzheimer's, dementia, traumatic brain injury, a lot of brain issues, or people who have like mental fog. They don't remember things really well. I've seen a lot of amazing things in regards to that, which I wish that the medical establishment would realize that, because in the world of medicines for dementia, there just really isn't any good ones, actually. And they're already using, literally this machine, it's called a Hydrofix from the Holy Hydrogen Company. They are using it there's actually a special clinic in Japan that's doing a lot of research on Alzheimer's and dementia, and that's literally the #1 device that they use. One of the interesting things about hydrogen is that it also opens up ghost vessels. A lot of people probably won't realize how big of a deal that is, but it's a really, really big deal. We literally have like these blood vessels that don't get blood anymore. They're like a ghost town. And I think we all realize, and it's written in ancient scripture, that life is in the blood. And so if you don't get blood somewhere, you're not going to have, like, typically if you don't have proper blood supply, that area will die. Like if I put a rubber band around my arm, my arm is going to turn purple and basically die if I'm not getting proper blood supply. But they realize that hydrogen appears to bring life. Here's where the spiritual aspect of hydrogen actually appears to be. It literally appears to bring life. Like if you were to have, here's a crazy thing in Japan, if you were to have a stroke and you're not getting any blood supply to part of your brain, that part of the brain will literally start to die after roughly 5 minutes, because it's not getting proper blood supply. And in Japan, they realize that if you inhale the hydrogen gas, here's where the gas is different than the water, it will literally keep that area, it appears to keep that area of the brain alive with no blood, Chris. I mean, I don't know if you realize how big of a deal that is. That is game changing. And so this is a huge part of the things that hydrogen can do, because I think that's why it has the anti-aging effect. I think that's why, like all this free radical damage, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of this oxidative stress is actually a form of oxygen. This is why I don't like to use a lot of oxygen. I tried oxygen supplementation when I was sick, and honestly didn't really do much for me, because the oxidative stress, they realized, the Japanese basically said 97 to 98% of all disease comes down to oxidative stress. That's why hydrogen has such a profound effect on almost every single medical condition, because oxidative stress, like ROS, reactive oxygen species, for example, it seems like a form of oxygen. Hydrogen comes in, it seems to have an affinity for oxygen, hence H2O, and it appears to neutralize this free radical damage, just turns to water, and then the body can function and run on all cylinders all over again. You know what I mean?
Right. And you said earlier that this is somewhat of a super antioxidant.
Yeah, very permeable antioxidant and selective too. So it doesn't just go in indiscriminately the way that like vitamin C does, because you don't want to just remove all oxidative stress. Life ultimately is a dance. It's a balance, a lot like men and women, yin and yang, positive and negative polarities. So life is about balance. And ultimately, one of the things that I learned about hydrogen is, in my opinion, hydrogen appears to be the ultimate balance bringer. So it brings balance, it brings homeostasis, quote unquote, back to the body. And so that's one of the beauties that I've seen of it, and how it affects everything, from the minerals, nutrients, and even the way that the cells talk to each other. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, we still don't even know exactly, like, I wish I could show you one of these studies. There was a study where they had these 2 boxes full of mice, and they basically bombarded them with radiation. And one box the mice had the hydrogen, the other ones didn't. And you could see clear as day, you didn't even have to be a scientist to really understand the difference, because the ones that weren't getting the hydrogen, their body temperatures were cold, which we should talk about that in a second. They were all huddled up together, and they weren't very active. The other box, all the mice were running around, a lot of energy, body temperature was normal, and they were pooping, and everything was, they were doing great, almost like nothing had happened. And the reason that I say to bring the body temperature into this is because the Japanese also discovered that almost every single cancer patient has a lower core body temperature than they're supposed to. They're realizing that there is a correlation between body temperature and disease, medical problems. And one of the things that hydrogen appears to do, they learned this during thermal imaging studies that they were doing in Japan, specifically in the clinic that is working on Alzheimer's and dementia patients. And they realized that hydrogen increased core body temperature. This is why you see things like, have you ever seen like a little kid in a diaper on a not very warm day, just running around and maybe with the garden hose, and the water's so cold, and they're fine. Their bodies are warm, where you see an elderly person and it's like 90 degrees out and they're still cold, And a lot of it has to do with the movement of the blood, the blood flow. And so it's something that's very important, and hydrogen appears to have a positive effect on that also.
People with cancer have benefited from this, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, there are studies already that show, I've seen a lot of stuff in regards to cancer. I mean, it's one of the things, actually, I didn't mention this part. One of the things that they did find when I went to do my Western medicine first, before I started down my road, is I did have tumors in my body on top of all this. My tumors were they were basically what they call neurofibroma. So I literally had tumors growing in my nerves, which was one of the other issues about why I was in so much pain. But there are studies, and I could give you one example. Actually, there was a woman who she was terminal. I mean, she had cancer. It was breast cancer, but it had spread so much. They told her she had, I believe, less than 6 months. And they weren't even going to do any treatment, but she ended up saying, come on, do some treatment. This was a woman actually in Japan. And one of the interesting things is she started using the hydrogen. And there's already research on this, of using hydrogen while getting certain cancer treatments, which personally, I wouldn't have done that, but that's what she did. Her cancer went away so fast, the doctors literally couldn't believe it. They were like, this is supposed to be incurable, and your cancer just went away so quickly. And then on top of that, she's now been alive. I mean, she only had 6 months or less, and I believe she's been alive now for like 7 years. I mean, she's totally beat the odds. And there's numerous research in regards to hydrogen protecting you from the chemo or the radiation, but making the cancer respond quicker as far as it going away. Though I've seen, and this is important, this is my own opinion, and I won't name the name of the products, but I've also seen hydrogen made incorrectly, where it actually appears to accelerate cancer. And more recently, when I had this laboratory reach out to me, when they were lab testing some products, that's exactly what they saw. They saw some very strange things that were coming out of these. It was a Chinese machine. Again, I won't name it, but all I'll say is that the lab tester was like, this stuff would cause cancer. And I said, this is exactly why it's so important to make hydrogen properly. This is why I don't personally take hydrogen pills, or I don't do those little hydrogen bottles, or anything with stainless steel or lye or sodium hydroxide. You know, I only use extremely high purity. Extremely high purity when it comes to medical gases is super important. And in the world of hydrogen, I don't see almost anybody talking about it. And it's, again, really, really, really important how you make it.
Would you say a person of any age would be able to use this?
If the hydrogen is made properly, in my opinion, absolutely. If you're not making it properly, then no, please don't do it. I've seen people do it. I've seen pregnant women and women who give it to their little children. In fact, here's another good example of why not. So this is a lab test on water, right? We were talking about it earlier. Who do you think that the contaminants in water affect the most?
Children, yeah.
Babies and little kids, because their livers and their kidneys are not fully developed. And so purity is very important for kids. And so I don't think it's any different for hydrogen gas, you know, in my opinion. And the stuff that they find in the water, I mean, I didn't even know they had radioactive contaminants in water. That was a shocker to me. I didn't know that we could filter them out either through this process, which again is not very expensive, from the mypurewater.com website. And then, of course, learning about bacteria, parasites, viruses in the water is another crazy thing. So I really became, honestly, quite a water expert. I looked at all the data, and I filter my water a specific way. I make my hydrogen a specific way. And then I just live my life a specific way, and it transformed my life. I got my life back, which was huge. I was crushed, brother. I was so depressed, and my life was over. I mean, I was bedridden, and you know, there wasn't anything I could do, and it was a heartbreaker. And being in a lot of pain kind of messes with your head after a while. It's kind of like torture, you know. It'll just mess me up in time, and I certainly went through that. And so,
so you believe that the hydrogen may have also triggered some spiritual experiences for you. Also, have others reported this as well?
A few people, because there haven't been a lot of people who have been on hydrogen as long as I have and doing it the right way. I've seen people who have taken, for example, hydrogen pills for a long time, used cheaper products, or just products that, in my opinion, aren't very good. But I've never seen anybody really do it long-term like I have. There was only a few people that I personally know, and they were having extremely similar effects, but they had been on the hydrogen for maybe more like 2 years, where I think I've been on it at this point, like, I don't know, like doing it properly, probably about 7 years is how long I've been on it. But I was messing around with different devices, like, for example, like the Kangen machine, which, in my opinion, completely the wrong way to do hydrogen. I tried so many other devices and never got the results, and I was really confused about that. And then in time, I really clearly realized how you're supposed to make it and use it, and then that just changed everything. And like I said, the spiritual aspect, I also think that the spiritual aspect comes from, yes, the hydrogen, but the purity of your blood. So that's a big thing that I've also been tackling, is the purity, trying to overcome any chemicals, you know, pesticides, microplastics, and parasites too. So I also became quite an expert in parasites. The Japanese have literally unbelievable research when it comes to how parasites work, and it's nuts. The things that they do to the human body are just bonkers. So I did all these things, not expecting a spiritual experience, and then I started having these just really, they were such wild things that I literally was hesitant to talk about them because of the things that I've seen and experienced, and they're borderline, like, are we talking aliens here? like beings of light from other places, or are we talking like spiritual, kind of quote unquote on a religious level? The things that have been shared with me have been, I mean, I have a whole book inside of me, not just a book. I have a whole library inside of me. I've been getting these quote unquote downloads for quite a few years now, and they've been really ramping up lately for like the last, gosh, I would just say the last 3 months. The last 3 months, I mean, I got a whole different view of human history than is written in any book almost. Though there are bits and pieces in a lot of these kind of ancient books and tablets. In fact, it was one of the reasons I was actually interested in sharing some stuff with Billy Carson, because I think that some of our information really, really comes together. And I think that we could really potentially bring out something that would really change things. I mean, I've literally gotten some weird messages in regards to things we can do for the body. Like I literally want to build a device. So there's a device that came to me. This has been over a year ago now, that supposedly, and this is a pretty bold statement, and I want to be real cautious about what I say, but basically a device that could potentially make all medical conditions go away, but even take it a step further, can literally make the body young again. So we're talking about entering this device being 80 years old and coming out like you're 20 again. And I actually talked to a UCLA scientist about it, because there's a guy who knows me, and he's like, why don't you talk to this UCLA guy? I believe he's a doctor and a scientist. And the guy who knew me was like, I have a really hard time believing that this device that you're thinking about will do the things that you think he'll do. So I talked to this UCLA guy, and I actually was able to compile data that really supported, you know, the hypothesis, the theory here. And then he was only supposed to give me like 5 minutes. We were supposed to have a brief conversation. That conversation turned into like 2.5 hours or something crazy. And by the time we were done, the guy was like, this is crazy, but I actually think this might actually work. He goes, this is nuts. The fact that nobody's ever thought about it. And it is, I mean, I'll just give a clue, but I won't talk too much about it. But it is something that is happening in nature. Nobody realized it. That's why I was able to pull data from different places that basically showed that in theory, I'm technically right. And I do believe that the people who built, for example, the Giza pyramid, they knew about it. And I won't go into why just yet. I'll just say that it seems pretty obvious that they knew this design, or the way that it's all about how the human body works, actually. So it's almost like a trick, or you're hacking the body. And I don't even think it's a hack. I think it's just understanding how things work, and we've forgotten. That's the biggest thing that is happening with me, is that I realize now that I was in a state of amnesia. Things just keep coming to me. It's like a river of information. And the hydrogen has done something to my brain, you know, and the amount of things that I could go on in quite a bit of detail too. But so I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, right on.
It's been pretty.
You mentioned parasites, and this is something that even recently more and more research is coming out about how parasites can be fundamentally the cause of a lot of illnesses in humans. Do you think hydrogen will have an effect on killing parasites?
Absolutely. And so personally, here's the thing about parasites. Parasites are not just like one. There's not just one. The best example that the average person will understand is when you compare them to bacteria. So let's say you have an infection. A doctor doesn't just give you any antibiotic. They do specific antibiotics based on the bacterial infection that they believe you may have. And of course, there's wide spectrum antibiotics too. But so the parasites are the same thing. Not every antiparasitic is going to work on every parasite. Okay. So what I personally do is I go after it from many different angles. From the food I consume. So the food I consume is highly antiparasitic. So that's something that I do. I also take antiparasitics, but not all the time. I do them every 1 to 3 years to keep my parasite numbers low. But the beauty about hydrogen is nobody thought really of it as an antiparasitic, but I found a study where it literally showed that when you're using hydrogen, they found all these parasites, for example, in the liver, and the hydrogen appeared to lower the amount of parasites quite a bit in the liver. And so I believe that using it regularly, because you have to understand nature. Again, you always have to understand nature to understand what direction you want to go. So one of the things about nature is I believe that parasites are there for a reason. They have a function. They have a purpose by the creator. If you make your body, your temple, a certain way, the parasites won't even want to be in there. I believe what the hydrogen is doing, I don't think it's killing the parasites. I think it's creating an environment where they just don't want to be there or don't need to be there, so they take off, and that's why the numbers end up being so much lower. And parasites really interfere with the way that we think, the way that we feel. And remember, here's just a few things that parasites, in my opinion, are doing to your body. One, remember how we talked about nutritional deficiencies?
Yeah.
So one of the things that parasites do is they tend to eat a lot of your nutrients before you really are getting them. So they're just going to make nutritional deficiencies worse. They hang out all over your body. They love to be in your GI system, but they're actually growing there's different stages of their growth, and they're all over the place, from your GI system to the tissue of your skin, to even in your lungs, by the way. You literally have, most likely, most people have eggs in their lungs. So even though they take an anti-parasitic or try to deworm, they don't realize, and I realized this from the Japanese research, that parasites have typically a 3-month cycle of life. So if you take some dewormer for a week or two, now you better know what you're doing, please. Like I said, I'm not giving medical advice because I don't want to do it the wrong way. And believe me, you don't want to do it the wrong way. You don't want to make these parasites stronger. You want to make sure to do it the right way. And I do consults with people if they want to do them. But here's the thing. I have a 3 to 4 month protocol when I do my parasite cleanses. And that's another one where I had literally a very, very spiritual experience also, which shocked me. I did not expect the things to happen. Again, the more that I clean my body, there's so much garbage, in there. And I believe it's actually by design. I believe that somebody designed everything to be this way because they don't want us thinking clearly. They don't want us to know who we are. They don't want us. They want us to be confused. They want to dictate, what we should do with our lives or what we should believe. But once you start having access, even access to source, which I was lucky enough, I believe I'm one of the probably very few people on the planet who've ever literally been able to see it and experience it. Some people might call it God, but man, it's unbelievable. I mean, and it's all sitting there. What's really weird is I couldn't find it in any book. And then eventually I just kind of stumbled upon it, was in this book. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard of this book. It's called The Essene Gospel of Peace. But the reason that I had I kind of had a hard time with the experience was because I couldn't find it anywhere. Nobody had ever had the same experience. Nobody had written it down. I'd never seen it in a book. I mean, we're talking a lot of books. I read a lot. And then this one, I just stumbled upon it by accident, and literally just the last 3 pages described exactly what I saw and heard and experienced, and it blew my mind. That's why I used this book. There's a lot of techniques in here for health, and I actually used a lot of the techniques in this book for overcoming my medical conditions as far as, quote unquote, the way I eat. So again, I observe nature, I look at the science, I do critical thinking, and then of course I do trial and error, and I've done all these different testing on myself to try to figure this all out. Right. And it's just been a wild ride.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. I'd love to hear about that spiritual experience if you could tell us.
Yeah, that one would probably be a little long. I can tell you that I was able to go to the other side. So there's a technique. It kind of happened by accident the first time. And then, of course, these things have been rushing to me because once you go to the other side, so here's what's kind of weird. I'll give you a little example, a little taste of what happened to me. Well, there's like different stages, almost like different rooms in a house or whatnot. And I would go through different stages, and each stage would take me deeper and deeper.
Were you meditating or in a sleep state?
Okay. I was meditating. Happened when I was so one of the techniques, I won't give all the details right now either, but there is a way to use water. So water is part of the technique to opening the door. So there's literally doors, and the doors are made of hydrogen. And so I went through more than one door. So for example, okay, so you know that we have the flesh body, right? But we also do have a spirit body. And I say this because I seen it. So I'm not talking about something I read. I mean, I literally experienced this. The spirit body has certain things that it can do as compared to the flesh body has certain things that it can do. And ultimately merging them together, you can do things that are just nuts. Like that would be another conversation, but some of the stuff so far that we've seen, I say we because there was somebody, luckily, thank God, somebody was with me who was able to witness this. So I seriously would have questioned my sanity if somebody wouldn't have been there, because what I was witnessing, like, I don't like using these words, but I'll use it for right now. Like, quote unquote, I got to meet what people would call God. And luckily, the person who ended up being there, they got to meet him too. So we were both there, and I was literally looking over. I'm like, are you seeing what I'm seeing here? Are you hearing what I'm hearing? And it was giving us visions too. So then I was like, what are you seeing? He was being given the exact same visions I was, because the way this thing communicates, and this is what I mean, I should call it God, because maybe it could be like an interdimensional alien. I really don't know, to be honest. And I didn't really want to put a name to it, but it was showing us a lot of things, conveying a lot of information, even taking me at one point back to, this is really wild. So do you remember when you were in your mother's womb?
I do not.
Right. The average person doesn't, right? I never did. Well, here's what's crazy. So this being somehow, forget time and space, it took me back to that moment in time when I was a baby inside my mother. And I was literally there, and I realize now why we don't remember. It's because the human body is not fully developed yet. So your brain is not fully developed. You don't really have these memories. You know, this is why when you're really little, you haven't developed all these memories yet until you start growing older, right? But your spirit, or this other alternative light body that we also have, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to call it spirit. The spirit holds all those memories from before you were born and after you leave. You take the stuff with you. The spirit was there the whole time that you were this baby. And so it took me back to this moment, and I could feel everything when I was a little baby inside my mother. And I was like, wow, it just changed. It actually changed my perspective on a lot of things, because I was at the most peace I've ever experienced when I was a baby, but yet I had forgotten. I didn't remember. So somehow this thing connected me to the source of memories. And this is why somehow it just keeps happening. I have like a story almost unfolding of history, like to answer questions that, I hate to say it, but like almost nobody's been able to answer. You know, as humans, we have so many questions about, where we came from, where is quote unquote God in all this, or potentially aliens, or what they call the Watchers. I mean, there's so much information. And then of course, understanding the human body, which was really my original goal. I just wanted my body, I just wanted to be able to walk again, really, right. And not be in pain. So, but yes, it's a type of meditative state, and it has everything to do. This is what's interesting too. You know what really opens the door? I'll give you one secret, is this word right here. If you can even see it, but basically peace. It says peace. Yeah. So the way that your brain works and how that affects your breath and how that affects your heart, and that affects the movement of the water that is basically in your veins, because your veins, your blood moves like a river, by the way, and all this sets off this almost like reaction, because ultimately what you're trying to do is put your body in an ultimate place of peace, so that you can actually, your light body begins to come forth. But first you got to go through a stage of darkness. So that's probably the most freaky part. I think the average person would have a little bit of a tough time, because you have to go through some pretty scary stuff. It reminds me of a verse in scripture that says, as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And that's exactly what you have to do. You end up going through death. That's ultimately the path. And it took a while. And you had to be, and there was a lot of temptation there. And eventually I witnessed my own death. And then once I went through that process, there was this burst of light, and there was actually a being of light waiting for me on the other side. And then that was super wild. I had a lot of questions, and she was wonderful. And then eventually she took my hand, and then that's when we left planet Earth. And then we went, and that's when I realized that the stars are actually doorways. They're portals. They're actually they're portals for the soul. So they truly are what we would call a star gate. Gate really means a door. So the stars are actually doors. And she took me, and I would have never been able to do it without her, because I don't understand the way the universe works. I don't know which star leads to where and where we're going. I didn't know any of it. And she actually tests you. Here's a really weird thing. She tests your heart. So when you're on the other side, you're naked. And when I say naked, I don't mean like without clothing. I mean like your heart's totally exposed. Everything is there. You can't hide, the truth. Your heart is front and center, and they can see everything. And then once that happened, she took me through the first portal, and boy, we started traveling at crazy speeds. And then we would arrive to another one. And then from there, boom, we'd go a whole different direction. And I mean, we traveled through the stars, super crazy distances. I mean, I don't even know how far, but it's way beyond Mars. I mean, we were way the heck out there. You couldn't even see planet Earth anymore. And, there was a little bit of fear, thinking like, I never thought I'd come back to my body. And I started realizing that there is a way. But as we went deeper, there were more beings. So there are other beings that I did get to talk to and spend time with. And then they would open, there's almost like doors as you went, and you were allowed in, depending on your heart, actually, of all things, your heart dictated whether you were allowed in or not.
Wow.
And
that's incredible, man. I'm definitely going to have you back on to explore some of these experiences. They're fascinating. And thank you so much for sharing this information about hydrogen. If people are interested in finding out more, what's the best way that they can do so? Your website, anything else you got out there?
All right. And before I share that, I just want to say one thing so everybody understands it. I want it to be really clear. Everybody can do what I was talking about. One thing that was shown to me on the other side is that we're all destined for it. We're all designed for it. Everybody has the ability to do it. So it's not like somebody can try to exalt themselves above others and be like, oh, I'm special and I get to. Everybody can do it. And that was shown very, very clearly to me. And ironically, it was written in this book too. So the book that I told you about explains that we were literally designed for that. So I think that's the really big part that humans are missing, is that this human body and the spirit, they were designed for something. There's a purpose, and we haven't even realized what it is. And once you begin to realize what it's really for, it's going to open up the door to a whole other world that people couldn't even begin to imagine. It's actually quite beautiful and absolutely incredible to transform your life. This is why so many people, in my opinion, are depressed or feel unfulfilled or just sad or like something's missing, is because something is missing. And I felt that way since I was about 6 or 7 years old. And this changed everything in my life. And so it's become the most important thing to me. But anyway, to answer your other question, where people can find me, people can help me too, by the way, support me for free by simply just going to, for example, the majority of the information is on YouTube, and I give everything away for free. So you can go there, subscribe, share, it's all free, and it really helps the channel, and give the video a thumbs up, all that good stuff. And the name of the channel is Uprising 144K. I'm sure you know what the 144K stands for, the 12 tribes of 12,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you can also find me on Twitter, otherwise known as X, Instagram, Rumble. And I would really suggest subscribing to all of them, because there have been a lot of attacks on me and my channel. So if one gets affected, the only way you're going to find me again is if you're subscribed to me, and for example, on Twitter or whatnot. And so that's the way that people can find me. And if people really want to contact me directly, I do my best to get back to everybody. And a lot of people do want consults for their medical issues too. I don't do a lot of them, but if people really want to contact me, they can email me at uprising144k@gmail.com. Also, if they want to do that.
Excellent. Greg, thank you so much. Like I said, definitely love to talk with you more in the future. Much more we can get into. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We will talk again tomorrow. We'll see y'all then.